The First Minister, Nicola Sturgeon, is heading to China this weekend on her first trip there since 2015. The visit is to promote growing cultural and educational links between Scotland and the world's second largest economy and, of course, to bolster trade. Well, I sat down with the First Minister to find out more.
The visit is very much about promoting Scottish businesses in one of our biggest international markets. There will also be a focus on deepening and strengthening the cultural links between Scotland and China, trying to attract even more Chinese tourists to visit Scotland, more Chinese students to study here in Scotland, but also supporting companies to sell more of their goods and services into the Chinese market. We've seen a really dramatic increase in Scottish exports to China in the last year alone. Tourism numbers, student numbers are increasing, but the scale of the Chinese market is such that we need to continue to work hard to make sure we fulfil the potential that we have there.
And in terms of the timing of this visit, this comes, of course, with less than 1 year to go until Brexit. Has that shaped the timing at all?
It makes it all the more important, given that we're facing, unfortunately and deeply regrettably, being taken out of the European Union and the single market. It makes it all the more important that we work hard to nurture other markets. Now, I don't want to turn Scotland's back on the European market. That will continue to be extremely important, and I will continue to argue for Scotland to be in the single market, able to trade freely. But yes, we've got to redouble our efforts to increase our presence in other markets, China, with the scale of that being an extremely important one.
After your last visit to China, there was a memorandum of understanding signed, which was dubbed the Scottish Shambles after the $10 billion deals collapsed. What lessons have been learned in that regard? Well,
of course, with that memorandum of understanding, there were no financial or legal deals signed. This was a memorandum about exploring the potential for deals. So a lot of what was said about it wasn't really rooted in reality. That said, we recognised and listened to some of the concerns that had been expressed in Parliament and said very clearly that we would learn from that. So one of the things we're looking at just now is how to embed much more firmly within the public sector finance manual, for example, principles of due diligence around human rights. So these are important developments that we will take forward.
Now, in terms of human rights, obviously in China that has lots of considerations. What's the ethical threshold that you have for doing business in China?
Well, look, we condemn human rights abuses wherever and whenever they occur, and I'm a great believer that, you know, as a leader of a country wanting to do business and wanting to expand business, we've got to be very firm about the values and the principles we hold dear and not compromise on that. I take human rights and raising in, you know, an appropriate and constructive way the issue of human rights in China. I met with Amnesty International last week, as I did ahead of my last visit to China, to be briefed on the issues that are of current concern to them. As I did in my last visit to China, both in one-to-one meetings but also in public platforms, I will raise the issue of human rights. The last visit, I chose to do that by focusing on women's rights, and a speech that was praised by Amnesty International. I'll make a speech in this visit about children's rights. It will be to a UNICEF event. So these are important considerations. Of course, we want to be constructive and effective and not be counterproductive in what we do. And we want the relationship with China, of course, to encompass a whole range of different issues that are, I think, of mutual benefit both to Scotland and to China.
But if you look at the human rights issues which affect not just women and girls, but the whole country, for example, the China Rail Group, who were in partnership with you on the Memorandum of Understanding, they were condemned for corruption and for ethical violations in the Democratic Republic of Congo. At this stage, would you be willing to enter into another agreement with them, or is this an ethical line that you wouldn't want to cross?
We had, as I say, with that previous example, there was no actual deals signed. This was an exploratory memorandum of understanding. But we will, you know, do, and one of the lessons has been to strengthen and further embed due diligence, including human rights due diligence, before any investment deals are signed. And I think that's important. And we've got to be very clear. I want to see Scottish businesses trade more with China. I want to see us really take advantage of the potential of the Chinese market. But, you know, human rights is not just important to us, it's a universally important principle, and it's one that we have to be very clear we don't ever lose sight of.
One of the booming sectors in China just now is data analytics and high-tech and surveillance. Is that something that Scottish companies would be willing to work with the Chinese on?
Obviously, in terms of technology, of course we want to look to encourage Scottish technology companies to explore opportunities in the Chinese market, but absolutely within constraints and within boundaries that we are comfortable with. And you talk about surveillance. I don't want to see Scottish companies with Chinese companies necessarily in the area of surveillance. So these are judgments that we have to make that abide by the principles we hold dear, while being prepared to explore legitimate opportunities for Scottish companies. How
keen are you to do big deals with China, so in terms of investment and infrastructure within the country, within Scotland itself?
Where that's appropriate and where that is in Scotland's interest, of course we should be prepared to explore that. I mean, we have a Chinese company that already invests, for example, in the Grangemouth refinery, not very far from where we are just now. So we already see some of those investments, and we should be willing to explore and look at those investments where they are in the interests of the Scottish economy. But the principal focus of this visit is actually in many ways the reverse of that. It's about looking at opportunities for Scottish companies to sell more of their products into the Chinese market.
And what do you hope China gets out of this?
Well, Chinese people, in my experience, like people in many different parts of the world, know about Scotland, are interested in Scotland. There's an increasing number of people from China choose to visit Scotland and see our beautiful scenery. So I hope that we can raise the awareness, look at opportunities where that's in the mutual benefit of our two countries, but of course do that within a framework of ethical values that are absolutely ingrained in the Scottish DNA.
You'll be aware that President Xi Jinping has now erased term limits on the Chinese presidency, effectively declaring himself leader for life. Are you comfortable doing business with a country that's enabled this to happen?
Look, Scotland, like many countries, want to trade with China. It doesn't mean that we agree with everything or approve of everything that's done within the internal arrangements of that country, whether it's China or any other countries. And I don't think for any country that would be taken to be the case. But just as I would not appreciate it, and I'm sure nobody would appreciate any other country sort of coming to tell Scotland how to run its internal affairs, then I guess the Chinese government wouldn't appreciate it if I did that. It's important that we are very clear, though, that wanting to do business with a country like China, wanting to strengthen the relationships, in many ways actually, in a very humble and respectful way, showcasing some of the things that we're proud of in terms of our democracy, our approach to human rights, our approach right now to inclusive growth, and to showcase that in a country like China. I think that is both appropriate and important.
First Minister, thank you.
Thank you.